Minister Chizero was keen to become a part of the World Bank and the IMF infrastructure, and lots of promises were made. And so Zimbabwe was told, no, don't manufacture cars, you can import them cheaply from Japan. Don't manufacture radios and electronics because you can get that cheaply from Japan. Don't do cloth because you can get that cheaply from India. Don't do any of these things, electronics, wolf tools and things like that, because you can import these things much easier. Focus on cash crops, focus on the production of minerals and so on, so that you pay off the debt that Zimbabwe has. And of course, Zimbabwe just got ever more into debt and having to pay more and more to service that debt. And we remember the big crisis with the fall of the wall in Berlin and the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and how that impacted on Zimbabwe, and how suddenly there were food shortages and so on. And the whole of the industrial zone below Harare, south of Harare, actually became empty buildings, much like the industrial zone in Ndola. Once Kaunda had privatized the copper industry, copper was doing quite well, the copper towns were doing quite well, but then the copper price collapsed because several conflicts came to an end at the beginning of the 1970s. The wars in the Portuguese colonies came to an end, the war in Vietnam came to an end, the liberation struggle in Algeria came to an end, and the demand for copper declined very dramatically. And the reason why I mention that is because you will see a week ago, Anglo-American Corporation has just bought one of the biggest, or bought into and partnered into one of the biggest copper mining companies in Canada. And if you go and look at the copper price and look at the sudden increase in the value of copper, you can see that the date of October 7 and the copper price increase correlates with each other very dramatically. So the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East at the moment, and of course the war that Trump wants to do in Venezuela and so on, makes the outlook for copper very good, because massive amounts of copper is going to be shot away in the form of bullets and arms and so on. And as Africans, we really should ask whether we want our minerals to become conflict minerals in the global contest between China and the United States, in the race for what is left. And what is left in Africa. And so in South Africa, we have a problem. And I traveled today 100 kilometers to get here in time for this particular meeting, from a tailings dam that broke 3 years ago from a diamond mine, and basically washed away 2 African townships. The spatial arrangements of apartheid always put the African townships on the wrong side of the tailings facilities of mining companies and so on. And we just managed to get a court case going against that particular company, which is Dubai-based now, but it was basically a company of Afrikaner capital in South Africa before they sold it in May, just before the tailings broke down. And the reason why I mention that is because it has a massive impact on the surface water and also groundwater situation in the southwestern Free State, much like the Kafue River incident with the Chinese in Zambia. But we also remember that in Zambia, Glencore and others also already impacted on the Kafue River. So we cannot really apportion a nationalization to mine pollution, or a nationality to mine pollution. We can't say it's the Chinese or it's the West or it's whoever. It's mining companies. And very often it becomes very difficult to distinguish between mining companies, because if you look at Glencore, it's listed in Hong Kong, right? It's got massive funding from the Chinese Development Bank. If we look at Standard Bank, which is the biggest African bank to invest in mining on the African continent, and they've got a whole map of all the minerals in Africa at their head office here in South Africa. Standard Bank now, as its biggest shareholder, is the Chinese Development Bank, but it's also a bank that is pretty much British as well, having its roots in the Anglo War and the struggle to regime change in the Boer Republic of the Transvaal at the turn of the century. So there's not just a red flag flying. Very often that red flag is flying alongside the British flag, alongside the Canadian flag, alongside the American flag even, to take out the minerals. And the tragedy is we are in a situation in South Africa where mineral depletion is a real reality. Gold is already finished in the South African context. Copper in Zambia is under serious threat because copper has been mined for almost a century or even more in the Zambian context. And what is going to happen to Kabwe, to Kitwe, to Solwezi, to Ndola, and so on when the copper runs out in the Zambian context? What are you going to do with those towns? Have you got plans for a post-mining economy? If I get off the airport in Ndola and I drive through the industrial area to the city, I see all these empty buildings where they once used to manufacture mining equipment, where they used to manufacture car tires, where they did all kinds of things which are now just standing empty because the mining companies that took over the nationalized mining industry in Zambia are only interested in extracting the minerals and taking them to the ports as quickly as possible and off to China, which is the world's factory at the moment, and off to the north to the military industrial complex in the United States and elsewhere to manufacture bullets and bombs and so on. Not that the Chinese are not manufacturing bullets and bombs, they are also doing so. So there was also a little book in the 1980s, 1970s by Sarah Manika Lapido called Independence. And although it was about the relationship between a man and a woman, the relationship between Africa and foreign investors is very much the relationship between a genderized relationship, as I would describe it, between Africa, who is exploited, Africa that is plundered, Africa that is abused, and the foreign investors who do extract the minerals from this continent. And we've never really become independent. We have instead become independent, meaning we are dependent on foreign investors because we don't trust our own people and our own countries and our own resources and our own solutions to overcome our dependency on the United States and China and so on. And as China moves towards a multipolar world, which is not necessarily a bad thing, we have to ensure that as Africans, we set the terms for anyone who operates within the African context, and we set down very distinct rules and obligations for any investor that comes here. And that is, in fact, something that we can learn from the Chinese, because to invest in China, you actually have to adhere to the rules and regulations set by the Chinese government. You cannot do as you please, and your intellectual property soon gets nationalized into the Chinese economy, and soon they use your intellectual property for their manufacturing. I don't think is a bad thing. However, it is something that we need to learn in the African context. We need to learn how to manage and control local and global economic oligarchs instead of them controlling us. Because at the moment in Africa, when global capital come, and in Zambia at the moment, I hear that Bezos, Gates, and Branson are very interested in your copper, and they're coming in there big time. We know that in the Congo, the copper industry there is dominated basically by Zionist influences and so on. We actually need to begin to control what is going on in our economies, how things are owned in our economies, how we benefit from what is there in our economies, and how eventually we break the dependence that we have on this foreign investment. Otherwise, we will be basically like sex workers standing on the street corner, wearing the skimpiest of clothes and makeup and so on, trying to attract the worst customers possible to our services that we are providing. And we can take that back down to mining and mining communities. We see it. I was in Jagersfontein today where this disaster occurred. And last night, as I sat outside the guest house on the veranda and watched the people passing the guest house, very young girls, underage girls, actually passed by and tried to solicit my attention, which is what the kind of situation is like now. And, within the South African context, we've got dying mining towns. Johannesburg is dying, in fact, because the mining industry has gone. It's left 6,000 abandoned mines, massive environmental destruction and community misery And also, when a mine gets abandoned, mine workers are abandoned. So tens of thousands of mine workers are abandoned. And the moment they're abandoned, they lose their work permits and their national status in South Africa to work here. They become illegal immigrants, and that then feeds into xenophobia and so on. If we look at the Congo, there have been xenophobic attacks against South Africans who have operated in Katanga, in Lekasi and Kolwezi and Lubumbashi and so on historically. So it's a phenomenon which is going to occur throughout Southern Africa as mining goes into steep decline and minerals become increasingly difficult to extract. And we need to say, how do we transition from mining in Southern Africa and SADC to a post-mining economy? But also in doing so, how do we prevent South Africa from being a sub-imperial power? Because that's exactly what it is. We don't want your nationals here, but our molds are all over your countries. And wherever our mine managers go, and Zambia had good Zambian mine managers, and they've all disappeared. If you go to the Zambian mines, they're all managed by South African mine managers. And even the Chinese mines in South Africa, Gold One in South Africa, they basically appoint people who look like me. They don't appoint black managers at all. But in South Africa, they don't bring cheap labor from China, unlike Zambia. When I fly to Zambia from Harare, for example, the aeroplane is full of Chinese cheap labor that all get off the plane in Zambia and I fly on to the Congo. But every time I get into Lusaka to Harare or vice versa, I find the Chinese guys all in the aeroplane, and I'm the only Caucasian white-skinned guy there. The political economy of race in the South African context. But shockingly, also I worked with a community in Sweden in the Arctic, and I found on the plane with me South African mine managers going there, operating for South African operations there. And so we see this intermingling. We talk about the Chinese, and maybe they will become more apparent now that there is this conflict and trade war between Trump and China, that who is Chinese and who is not Chinese. But fact of the matter is that many of these companies that we think are Chinese are not necessarily Chinese, and many of the companies that we think are Western are not necessarily Western. They take their money from anywhere it comes, and they also do the processing of their minerals anywhere where they can get the cheapest labor and conditions in which to do so. So a lot of our minerals and so on actually go east towards Japan and towards China and India for the purpose of processing. In South Africa, we've got 5,000 diamond cutters and half of them are unemployed. In Mumbai, there is 50,000 diamond cutters and they're all children. It's child labor. So we have not cleaned up how minerals work in the world, because the mining companies and those that buy the minerals and so on want to look at conflict minerals in Africa, but they don't want to look at how minerals actually contribute to conflict outside of Africa as well, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. So these are all important issues to look at as far as this is concerned. Now, I have not had much time to prepare because I was told about this just this morning, but I hope that some of the things that I have said here has some relevance to the discussion that is coming up now. But I don't think that we should look at the Chinese homogeneously. I think we need to look at them in their complexity, and we also need to look at, historically, the Chinese did not support all liberation struggles. They supported the Zimbabwean liberation struggle in the form of ZANU-PF, but in Angola they supported UNITA. ZAPU was supported by the Russians, and the ANC was supported by the Russians and not by the Chinese. Chinese supported the PAC and so on. So that history is also a complex history that needs to be untangled so that we exactly understand how they operate, because they are becoming a dominant global power. I think that in the next 20 years, economic power is going to shift east, but we in Africa need to prepare for that. But we also need to prepare for a just transition, not only in that west-east transition, but also in the transition to post-mining economies in Africa. We need to see what role China can play in that, but also in a multipolar world, we need to see what other people can play as well. The people in India, the people in Japan, the people in the West, and so on. We should not perhaps tie ourselves to one flag, because the global operators, the mining companies, the extractive industries, the manufacturers, all of them, their flags are multiplicity of flags. They are almost rainbow flags, because they will take their money from anywhere, and they will take their goods to anywhere, depending on where the markets are. But I think also we need to become far jealous of what is left in our countries, and not just allow it to be shipped out. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Before you go, this is going to be a conversation throughout. I'll be coming back to you to and fro. But for the time being, what have you got to say about the nature of Chinese mining in the region? And are you aware, for example, that a few weeks ago, something like 600 Chinese were thrown out of Angola?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the circumstances under which they were thrown out? And I agree with you entirely. I agree entirely that the manner in which there's been excesses or laxity in the regulations with regard to mining, especially on the part of the Chinese, as you will hear from Farai and Chilekwa, is largely due to the lack of clear guidelines on the part of the authorities. And in many cases, it's sheer corruption on the part of the governing elite in our countries. I can give you narratives of the extent to which state houses and military chiefs have been corrupted by the Chinese in particular, very crudely. But I wanted you to just to tell us very concretely, what is your record of the excesses which are said to be across the region with respect to Chinese mining?
Well, I think that Chinese mining from country to country differ. In the South African context, we have reasonably strong mining trade unions. And so we don't find Chinese cheap labor, and their abuses run foul of the unions often here, if and when they do. Whereas I know that trade union power in Zambia and in Zimbabwe and elsewhere is very weak, and so and I visited many of the mines, including Chinese mines in Zambia. I've not visited the mines where Farai operates, because they are in the southeast of Zimbabwe, and I haven't been there since the time I left Zimbabwe. But I know in the Zambian context there are lots of problems. But the problems with mining for me is this: the Chinese are bad and they are corrupt, so is everyone else. And so we have to actually clamp down on mineral extraction in Africa. We need to take control of mineral extraction in Africa. But we cannot really do so if we are divided in the small nation states that we are, that are not really economically viable as we stand. And this is why at one point I had some hope for SADC, as an entity. But as we can see at the moment, SADC is falling apart. I mean, Zambia is making weird decisions. Malawi and Lesotho and so on are making weird decisions within the SADC context. But South Africa has also been very hostile to the nationals of other countries. So we are dividing ourselves, and the only people who benefit from that division are in fact the Chinese and any other investors who come in, because they know we are so busy fighting one another that we won't pay attention to the issues of labor and labor exploitation in our countries.
Fine, I'll come back to you, David. Let's move now to the Zimbabwe experience. Farai Maguo, please. Farai?
Hello, Prof.
Yeah, welcome, Farai.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, David. It was really a pleasure to listen to this background information, how we got to where we are. Regarding the Zimbabwean situation, I want to first locate the problem. My observation is that at the heart of what we are now calling the Chinese problem in Zimbabwe is a predatory state that is in decline and that has destroyed, they've run down the economy completely. We saw the fast track land reform program, which failed in terms of addressing the issue of food sovereignty. The country is now a big importer of food, despite now the black people owning the previously white-owned farms. We have seen also a spectacular collapse of the manufacturing sector in Zimbabwe. We have also seen a collapse of the banking sector. Right now, we really don't have even a currency of our own. So to all intents and purposes, the Zimbabwean economy is all but collapsed, or rather has been informalized. And that also speaks to the problem of migration, where majority of Zimbabweans would leave if they get a chance to leave the country, because everything has been informalized. And against that background, we have seen predatory instincts from the state, where they are capturing anything that can be captured, that can give them that little United States dollars. Of course, when they speak, if you listen to Zimbabwe's finance minister, Mthuli Ncube, speaking about the so-called Zimbabwe currency, I don't know really what we are using right now. It has been changing every 3 to 5 years. They would bring another surrogate currency. Listen, even when he came to office in 2017, he said that we are not going to use these multiple local currencies. But he has been forcing it on the people, but the ruling elite, they want the United States dollars, which they are forcing on the people. And because of that, mining has become probably the only space where they are guaranteed of US dollars. They don't have expertise in mining. They don't have capital for mining. So what they did is to reach out to China, where the Chinese are bringing in capital. But when I say capital, they are not really bringing money, they are only bringing equipment, machinery, to disembowel Zimbabwe of its mineral wealth. So, because I've talked about it being a predatory state, there is no rule of law that is being observed. Zimbabwe has become like a carcass that is being torn apart by vultures. And you can track this to Mnangagwa 2009, when the first Chinese company came to form a joint venture with the Zimbabwe National Army, forming what they called Anjin. At one time, they said they are now the biggest diamond mine in the world by volume. Fast forward from 2009 to 2025, it's now about 16 years. That company is still there. They failed to construct even a single bridge. They failed to construct even a kilometer of tarred road in that area. They failed even to contribute to the Mnangagwa Health Center, the Mnangagwa Clinic, where They are now converting even a door to become a mattress. There is no investment of the diamond wealth in the well-being of the Marange people. The only sign that there is an economic activity in that area is the presence of. The only thing that the people of Marange will remain with after the diamonds are gone are graves of their loved ones who were killed because they were found in the diamond area, are the scars of hundreds of young people who were mauled by dogs, security dogs. It's the memories of torture, of displacement, of rape, and many other things. And that has become the model of the Chinese investments in Zimbabwe. Modeled around disempowerment of the local people, land grabbing, they take the people's land without their permission. Every day, we are receiving calls from all over Zimbabwe. I just want to read to you a message that I received, that is yesterday. I will conceal the identity. But this is Uzumba Maramba Pfungwe. It's the most loyal constituency to the ruling party. Then they say the Chinese, there are 2 Chinese companies which have just arrived. And there are some of the Chinese were arrested by the Zimbabwe Republic Police after breaking the legs of the locals. Crop fields are being taken over and gullies are lying all over unrehabilitated. Problems are worse in Pfungwe, Mtawa, and Maramba. Some people are being displaced and are now allegedly setting up residence along Mazoe River, where there are local gold paners as well, right? This is the summary measure of what mining means to the Zimbabwean people, especially under the Chinese. According to the Zimbabwe Investment Development Authority, ZIDA, about 70% of the investors that came into this country in 2023, they were Chinese. These are big companies, but majority of the so-called investors coming into this country who are not even registered with the ZIDA because they don't even have the profile of a company. Makorokoza, they are just informal diggers all over the country. They go there with the support or the backing of ruling party officials. I know that I risk being called xenophobic, and right now they are doing it with much skill. You know, whenever anyone raises the problem of human rights abuses by the Chinese, they say you are becoming xenophobic. Effects of how the Chinese are abusing the rights of the local people in our country. They are also polluting rivers. A lot of rivers in the country, in fact, most of the rivers are now muddy because the Chinese are digging along the rivers, especially for gold. In Manicaland, there is Mutare River, there is Odzi River, there is Sabi River, muddy because the Chinese are operating in those areas. We are also concerned that their model of operation is a departure from the model that was left by large-scale mining companies, which was underground mining. The Chinese are going for open cast mining. So when they do open cast mining, they are clearing the ground. They are clearing vegetation. they are disturbing the topsoil such that even after they are gone, it will be very difficult to cultivate crops in those lands again. Once they start operating at a place, even if, say, they get a permit that they are going to operate at that point, the moment they arrive, you have lost it. They will continue expanding. And the Environmental Management Agency, EMA, has been rendered ineffective because of the politicization of mining in Zimbabwe. Know some EMA regional managers who were removed from their position or their post and transferred to a rural outpost because they've challenged a Chinese operation. If you go to Zvishavani, Shurugu area, there is a mountain range there called Boterekwa. I think many Zimbabweans are now familiar with what's going on there. The Chinese are all over. They are flattening hills. And so the environmental footprint of the Chinese investments is massive. There is also the issue of cultural rights violations, where they are digging up. Cemeteries are being desecrated. I talked with some of the villagers who had the remains of their loved ones dug up by the Chinese. And I wanted to know what it meant to them. And most of them said it caused trauma to them. They were not even given counseling before and after. So they are left with deep psychological trauma. But all these things I'm talking about, they are negative externalities of their operations. But the big issue which Zimbabweans are complaining about is that these are non-renewable natural capital or natural assets of a country which are being plundered by another country. Right now, we are talking about lithium. Zimbabwe is the biggest producer of lithium in Africa. We have 6 large-scale mines. Of those 6, we have got 4 which are owned by China. Prospect Resources in Goromonzi, Sabistar in Bohera, Sinomine in Bikita, Kamativi in Matabeleland North. On paper, these companies are 100% owned by China. But in practice, we have deep suspicion that we don't think our government is so stupid that they would just allow China to come and harvest our lithium and leave a little freebies and take it to China. We believe our leaders are secret shareholders in these Chinese companies. That's why when the people of Zimbabwe are complaining that what's in it for us in the investments that are taking place at the hands of the Chinese, the government has got no answer to answer as to what, which means China is promoting corruption in Zimbabwe. And that is my big concern, because I believe Zimbabwe has got a lot to learn from China. China has managed to lift its people out of poverty. China has got very tough environmental laws. No African can go and do to the China what the Chinese are allowed to do in Africa. Even if there are tons of golds that are found beneath the Great Wall of China, no African can go and dig up the Great Wall of China because there are minerals beneath. They will kill you and they will burn you to ashes. You can't then say, I'm doing this because we are good friends with China. There's no friendship like that. We want a model where China can promote value addition of our minerals, create local value chains where our people can participate even in procurement of equipment and other consumables that are needed in the mining sector. Is not happening. The Chinese, they bring everything, including toothpicks. They bring them from China. When it comes to employment creation, the quality of jobs they are creating are slave jobs, whereby our people, for example, I have got a payslip. Some of you have heard about Dinson. Chris Mnangagwa loves to talk about it. I think even when he's asleep, if you ask Monica, you'll be dreaming and talking about Manise. But a driver who drives for more than 600 kilometers from Hwange, carrying coal to Manise, is earning $281 per month. Then you look at the Manise Steel project itself. Right now, it's in full production. They are exporting at least 60 to 80 trucks of steel billets from Manise to Beira and onward to China. We are talking about 1,800 to 2,100 tons of steel that the country every day. So it has become very extractivist. Manise can contribute to industrial. If we talk about the industrialization of China, steel played a very important role in the economic growth of China. But whilst Zimbabwe now has got an opportunity to even supply steel to other African countries, our steel is being monopolized by the Chinese, and there is nothing for the country. And finally, I want to also to comment on what I observed at Substar, whereby they are mining lithium, and they are saying we are answering to the call of the Paris Agreement that we must move towards a low carbon development. But you go to Substar, they have set up a thermal power station in the middle of a village. There is going to be land pollution because the coal is going to come by train. It will be offloaded at Nyazura. It will be taken by road and polluting everything. There's going to be air pollution in that particular area. They are also drawing water from Sabi River about 40 kilometers away. Both the water and the electricity they are going to generate, it's only for the mine. They are not going to share it with the community as corporate social responsibility. And I have a big problem with that approach where they are only thinking of themselves. I have not had time to talk about racism, where Zimbabweans are treated as inferior in these Chinese companies. I have pictures and a video of food where Zimbabweans are fed with food with maggots, and the Chinese have got special food for the Chinese. So I think all these things, they need to be discussed, and the government of Zimbabwe need to be engaged, but we also need to empower the Zimbabwean communities so that they can resist expropriation of their land, of their resources, of their labor. And for the communities to be able to stand strong, they need the support of civil society. We need to play our role and work with the labor unions as well to ensure that communities can exercise agency in defending what rightly belongs to them. Thank you, Prof. Back to you.
Thanks, Farai. Thanks, Farai. I think you have given us a very good summary of the things some of us have been hearing and reading from yourselves. I'm sorry to say that the media has not been as faithful to this task as you have been yourself personally. I wanted to ask just two questions. The first is, what has been the response of the state, of the authorities, to the evidence that you and others have produced to show the extent of the excesses in the mining industry on the part of the Chinese companies? What has been the response? Has there been any coherent response? Is there any indication of action being taken? And on that note, are you aware of what the Angolans have done? And if so, what really happened in Angola?
Should I respond now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, I know certainly the Angolans have sent back some of the Chinese back to China. I'm very much aware that there is a turning point even in the Zimbabwe government approach towards the Chinese. When we published our report in September last year about the Chinese investments in Zimbabwe, the government reached out to us and they said, we want to discuss your report and we want you to know that it is not government policy to allow the Chinese to do as they please in this country. After that, we also noticed that they started sending back to China, deporting a number of Chinese who don't have papers to operate in. The issues of the environment and the abuse of the rights of the local people, government has not been speaking with one voice. Right now, we have got a hot issue in Magunje, where the Chinese have built a cement factory near the Magunje. Who is this guy? Who is a permanent secretary for presidential affairs, something like that. After we raised the alarm that the community has been arrested, community members for protesting this project. Since March, they've been going to court and the like. This guy went on the ground and he said, we are with the community. This project must stop. But the provincial leadership of the ruling ZANU-PF party and the district development coordinator of the area are all with the Chinese. They are not with the people. We have another problem that is unfolding right now in Penalonga in Mutare, where the political leadership of the province are now participating in activities and trade that is happening there. So you have a situation where some of the leaders, during the day, they are saying we want to see order in the country, but during the night, they are partakers in criminal activities. I think the Gold Mafia documentary gives us a glimpse of who is involved in these things. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. We'll come back to you because I would like to end this discussion in about half an hour, 40 minutes, with firm recommendations as to the way forward. I did send the notice to the Chinese embassy, inviting them to listen to this, and I hope they are listening in, because we want to be able to open a dialogue between ourselves and the government, and the Chinese. We want to go as far as Beijing itself in making our concerns known to the Chinese through the embassy here in Harare and through our embassies, the Chinese embassies in our countries. Because I think it is time to say things as they are, but more important, to begin resolving these matters. Farai, just one question I wanted to have before I move on to Mumba. Is there a possibility of documenting or revealing, disclosing the extent of the involvement of state actors in these activities that we are talking about?
Yes. Yes, I think the possibility is there, but it's a very risky activity to embark on. And I would think that it is very critical for Zimbabwean civil society to work together on such a mission. A collaborative approach would be effective. Number one, it allows you to pool resources together. Number two, there's also the issue of the expertise that you need to do such a thorough research. And number three, it helps to spread the risk. And number four, it's important that it's a national issue. It should not be trivialized to become something that is an agenda of an individual or an individual organization. But as Zimbabweans, we need to say, this is our country, and I think we need to draw a line in the sand. This is not acceptable. I believe that broad approach can yield results. Thank you.
You would like some of the recommendations along those lines, but also any contact with the Chinese embassy, the Chinese government, through the embassy on these matters?
We have engaged, we tried to engage them, we've sent them letters, hard copies, emails. Unfortunately, we've not been lucky so far. We've not responded.
You don't respond at all?
No, they didn't respond.
So far, nothing.
So far, nothing, yes.
We'll come back to that. Chilekwa Mumba. Mwanja Kulu.
I hope I can be heard. And good evening.
Mwanja Mumba.
Tirichapo Bueno, Muripanje.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Everything's fine. The family is fine. You said there were some family issues. Are you okay?
Yeah, my father had an unfortunate incident. He's got blood issues going on. So.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope you getting medication.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming on board in spite of that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. I'll delve right into it. I hope everybody can hear me fine.
We hear you very clearly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Farai, and thank you, David, for that insight which has been given, especially the historical context, which was pretty educative, even to myself. I'll be speaking rather narrowly on particularly the Chinese and their conduct when it comes to mining activities in Zambia. One of the most important things you should know is that Zambia has very good, if not excellent, environmental laws which were put in place. However, the Chinese seem to be operating from a different set of laws because they're very flagrant in the way they disregard these laws. I think we've been making headlines as a country for being almost puppets of the Chinese and letting them get away with a lot of environmental degradation and disregard for mining regulations which we have in place as a country. And from where I stand, it's very sad to see even today that whenever the government, our government is talking, they'll be almost acting like they're the spokesperson for these Chinese operations. The most embarrassing thing about it is they even go out of their way to prove that there's nothing really wrong that the Chinese have done. I don't know if someone caught news of how we had a very senior government official trying to prove to communities that water was safe for drinking and thereby even took a drink of the same water in some of the communities which were heavily affected by the recent pollution, which has made world headlines once again. There are so many angles from which the Chinese feel like Zambia is their playground. And of course, we are kind of tied up to them economically because they have filled the gap, or rather pretended to fill the gap where it looks like we're benefiting more from whatever investment they bring into the country. But I think everything is almost the same when we look at Zimbabwe, our sister country, that the industry here in Zambia, in as far as mining copper is concerned, they're basically just taking it out, not adding value to auxiliary or peripheral industries which can be birthed from the copper industry. The Chinese instead just completely take out the copper without adding value to it. And even as they operate, they do so without following regulations. As I've said, there are so many examples which I could come up with where you have them operating smelters, even in residential areas, and they just don't care. The way they treat the communities, the way they work, it seems they've got a license to do anything as long as they take the copper out, which is very sad to see. And it's also interesting if you look at the tax regime, which has happened. Our Minister of Finance went out of his way again to defend it, where the concentrates from Zambia have been moving out without any tax obligations. And the reason was we do not have enough smelting capacity. But then if we're serious about what we're doing, why haven't we put deliberate policy to ensure that we have proper smelting capacity? There is good technology now, which can be properly fixed in 6 months to a year. You can have a smelter because of the technology which we have. And yet the government, again, seems to be doing things in the interests of China rather than our people. It has been very sad to see, if you look at the livelihoods which have been destroyed. I'll speak particularly on the recent spill, which is of a historic magnitude, as everybody has put. It's the worst environmental disaster on record in Zambia, and possibly in the top 10 in the entire world. I think some have even likened it to Chernobyl in terms of the consequence it has on the health of our people. And now, if you follow that case very well, which I'm doing, so far, the Chinese, despite the magnitude of the damage they have caused to those communities, to the aquaculture, the agricultural industry of those people, on which those communities were very dependent on, you cannot believe that they've openly committed a paltry $800,000 at today's rate. It's about $800,000, which they are saying will be compensation for our communities. Now, if we draw some comparisons where such pollution occurs, even in the Western countries, we should be talking about billions of dollars in compensation. And yet somehow they feel very free to stand alongside even government people, to seem as if there's something going on, and yet it's all a charade, it's all a show. And if you look into the details, we're getting worse than a raw deal, as it were. And another point I wanted to touch on, I think I'm very happy with what David had said earlier about what has happened to the industrial hubs in Zambia. If you look at where the wealth of this country comes from, it's well known that it's copper, and particularly on the copper belt, and now most recently in the northwestern province. Billions are moving out each year from these communities. But in terms of corporate social responsibility and everything else, in terms of infrastructure, they do not care. These so-called investors who, as our former president referred to as infestors, they're just infesting our country, not really investing. I know those are strong words, but that's the reality on the ground. Because there is no way that the communities which are around these mining operations live in total squalor They do not have anything in terms of proper hospitals, and these are things which need to be put in place as all these operations are going on. We all know that there are serious effects environmentally in the communities, which even affect people's health. But you find that around mining areas, people have to move maybe 50 kilometers in certain areas to access proper healthcare. So this type of investment with the Chinese is bringing does not make any sense in any way, shape, or form, because it ultimately does damage to our people and communities, and they benefit economically more than us. Our leaders are very good at paying lip service to some of these issues. They'll announce big money. They'll say maybe there's $1 billion invested, but if you see the trickle-down effects to our country, they're neither here nor there. And if you look at the taxation regime as well, it's something which really needs to be looked at or revised time and time again in line with the way copper prices are moving. I think that would be my contribution for now. I'm very conscious of time.
We have enough time, Chilekwa, but I wanted to just ask one question, and also just to alert you that we'll be asking for recommendations at the end on the way forward. We don't want this to end up in just a discussion that we're having. We're a policy dialogue, and we want to be able to make a difference, especially for people like yourselves. You and Farai have been working at you are on the cutting edge of this nonsense. What can be done to enable you and your organization and others like you to make a difference in terms of putting an end to this pattern and to make an impact on the policy framework in the extractive industries in Zambia? What kind of support would you like?
Well, first of all, that's a very good question. And, you know, we've been quite vocal about these issues for a while. We've talked about them. In Zambia, at least, the media is not as gagged. The biggest support which is needed would actually have to come from the corridors of power itself, being government. I think our leaders, our political leaders who are holding the balance of power right now need to give us a more open door policy. And one way of doing that is working with civil society groups as well as partners in development, that includes other governments, to pressurize our leaders to listen more to us and implement the recommendations which we have.
Yes. Have you been in touch with people like Claude Kabemba and his organization, the Southern Africa Regional Resource Watch? Because I know we have been in a number of conferences together with Farai, where the Southern African Resource Watch, together with our Surplus Trust, have tried to engender a regional policy framework, which also ensures that the region as a whole jointly acts on these matters, a kind of an extractive industry policy framework. Have you worked towards that in any regard?
Yes, I have contributed. I do believe I've even met Mr. Kabemba, I think 2 years ago or a year ago at a certain conference. And we have networked. However, I believe that something more needs to be done. As Farai had said, we need to move together as a unit. I think that will be the best way to pressurize our governments on behalf of our people.
Yes, I think as we end the program in a few minutes, we'd like you to come up with some very firm proposals towards that, something that all of us can do a follow-up upon. Charlize, I call you now. Charlize, last but not least, can you put things together for us, Charlize? What has been
Hi.
said so far, in addition to what you have to say to us today?
So a bit of background about me. My work is Pan-African. I go all over Africa, doing advocacy work and research work with energy-affected communities. And so it's not just critical minerals, but also more broadly fossil fuel and production as well. So power stations, renewable energy power stations, and critical minerals. And the first thing I'd like to bring note to is an issue of the just transition, which Farai spoke about earlier. A big move within the lithium space and the critical mineral space is to justify moving to renewable energy. And internationally and globally, there's a big push to talk about this just transition as though we are moving towards renewable energy. And that's not true. There is no energy transition. There is simply an energy expansion. Because as we grow energy, renewable energy, and there's definitely an uptake in renewable energy, there's also an expansion into fossil fuel extraction and production. What else is new is that China is playing more and more of a role in energy production and extractivism in Africa. But again, it's not a transition from Western to Chinese operations. It is an expansion in both regards. There is an expansion of Western financing and mining corporations, but there's also an expansion of Chinese financing and Chinese corporations. And as David said earlier, it can be quite tricky to separate the two. Who is from a Chinese background, who is from a Western background, because there's so many partnerships and interlinking processes. The mining company might be from Australia, but it might be backed by a Chinese finance. The Chinese company that mining might be backed by Glencore finance, and that Glencore finance is coming from all over the world, including South Africa. I'm currently sitting in Kuruman in South Africa's Northern Cape, where I'm doing work with manganese-affected communities. And all of the manganese mines around me have multiple finances, including Chinese finance, but also including South African finance. And the impacts felt across the continent, no matter what country it is in, and no matter who the financer is and who the operator is, the human rights impacts are vast. Extractivism is a problematic process. It is based within a capitalist enterprise of making as much profit as possible, which means that we need to exploit people for that profit. Whether you're in South Africa or Angola or Tanzania or Mauritania or Cameroon, human rights violations are happening within energy extractivism. The difference between Western and Chinese finance is often in the accountability processes. It can be very challenging to track who is financing an operation when it is backed with Chinese finances. And this is because public-private partnerships exist primarily in China. So it might be a private corporation that is doing the financing, but that corporation is actually being funded by the Chinese government. And so the process of trying to see where the money is coming from can be very complicated. And in addition, as David said, Chinese finance is also going into other nations' financing processes. So Standard Bank is not only getting money from South Africa and from Africa, it's getting money from all over the world. So is Glencore, so is Vedanta. It becomes very complicated. And just because a company is headquartered in a particular country or the mining operation right is held in a certain country, it doesn't mean that the whole process is coming from that one particular place. So it's very complex and very complicated. But there are processes to try and follow the money and follow due diligence process. We need to start with ownership mapping and public registers, publicly exposing the banks that are financing these projects, the insurers and the buyers that are tied to harmful mine, creates pressure points. Tools can be company registers, investigative collaborators. There are many civil society organizations who primarily do financial research, and they're very willing to collaborate with other organizations. One such is Follow the Money, which has compiled a compilation of Chinese standards. So for any human rights violations around mining, Chinese standards, Follow the Money has got resources on how to track that financing process. We also need to take record of the human rights violations, because once you have records of the human rights violations, it is more feasible to do advocacy work on those violations. If you can compile them and take them to the financiers and show them to the financiers, but also show them to your national government, to regional governments, and then also to other civil society networks to create international pressure, it is possible to see results. And although the results may feel small and may feel limited, there are results in this space. But ultimately, the biggest issue, and I think David spoke about this earlier, the biggest issue with mining and processing on the African continent is that we are still trapped in this dependency model of exporting raw resources out of the continent. China has the Belt and Road Initiative, where they spend huge amounts of money building infrastructure, which is pit-to-port infrastructure. But the USA is sponsoring the Lobito Corridor, which is going through the DRC and through Zambia, going to the Angolan coastline. The UK, sorry, not the UK, but the EU has also got many of these same processes, these pit-to-port resource and infrastructure deals. It's all wrapped up in a modern neo-colonialism. Whether it's going to China, whether it's going to the UK, whether it's going to Australia, it's not benefiting Africans. And I think when we talk about policy dialogue, we need to take it back down to the community level, so that the policy dialogue is not just looking at what national government can do to benefit and accountability mechanisms that national government needs to impose on the mines. And those things are important. The whole mining process needs to be very, very well monitored, and accountability mechanisms need to be put in place. The corruption and the elite capture is incredibly detrimental to our own potential for further industrialization. You can't build a processing or a manufacturing factory in the area of a mine that's going to create jobs and create value addition when those processes are mired in corruption. But again, we need to take it back to the community level and bring the community into the policy dialogue process. And sometimes that means reframing the discussion entirely, so that we're no longer even talking about export models or value addition or beneficiation, but we're talking about alternative strategies and how communities can actually become the beneficiaries of the resources under their feet, and their alternative strategies and livelihood processes that may not even include mining or industrialization. And I think that we need to start putting more emphasis on that at a policy dialogue space. I don't want to go on for too long because I'm very mindful of time, but thank you, that's my input.
Thanks, Charlize. You, of course, you'd make the distinction or the comparative difference between the formal mining activities that we have known for over a century in the region and the kind of mining conduct that we're talking about that Farai and Chilekwa have outlined. Would you acknowledge that difference?
To a degree, yes. I mean, I think that there is quite a lot of evidence that there's a lot of impunity happening around Chinese mines. But I would also like to point out that the worst impunity is happening in nations and states where there's very, very little government oversight. It is not possible for those same violations to be happening in spaces where there is better due diligence and better governance. And I mean, I'll give you the example of Madagascar. Ambatovi mine is run by a South Korean and Japanese company. And the human rights violations there, I would say, are as dire as what is happening in Zimbabwe and Zambia with the Chinese. because there is absolutely no government oversight of the mining regulation there. It's just not happening. In the DRC, Glencore and many of the other very big mines there that are not necessarily Chinese run, but are Swiss run and Australian run and South African run, the human rights violations in those spaces are astronomical. I mean, we need to keep in mind that the war in DRC, the genocide that is happening in DRC, is a minerals-based war. It is about power and it is about control. And that war has not started since the Chinese have started there. It came through the Belgian colonialism that happened before then. So I'm reticent to say that there is a stark difference. I think that there's always a degree of difference, definitely. But I don't want to delegitimize the implications that are coming from other development programs, including those by African countries and African financing. I think the big overarching issue is the process of extractivism and the process of the capitalist extraction of resources that is exploitative for the benefit of a foreign nation, whoever that foreign nation is. And I think that we need to stay connected to what is happening across the globe and hold a responsibility at multiple points, because that is how we will change the system. If we only target a single nation and the violations that are happening from that nation, I don't think that we're going to make the impact that we want to make at the global level, nor at the local level.
I agree. One has to be holistic. Of course, but at the micro level, you see, that's where the communities feel it worse. You know, when you hear the reports, get the reports that Farai and Chilekwa have outlined, it's at the level of the communities. When you have a whole mountain in your backyard ripped apart, a whole mountain opened up, the graves, cemeteries uprooted, it brings the reality of a century-old, more than a century-old curse that mining has been to Africa, to the community. And so one can't ignore that, of course not. But I agree with you that we need a more holistic approach. And we've been talking about this for too long, and just wonder, through people like yourselves on this platform, and also people like Claude Kabema, how can we get down to instituting some kind of lobby policy framework which brings some kind of order to this extractive industries that we are clearly a curse. I would really, if I had a choice, tomorrow ban mining for a while in Africa. It had been little or no benefit to most of our people. Certainly for countries like the Congo, there's not little or nothing. And even everything that we can talk about in terms of the adversaries, the adverse conditions, economic and otherwise, it's hard to isolate or exonerate the extractive industry. So how shall we proceed? It's a question I'm putting to you, all three of you. How shall we proceed hereafter to begin making a difference, to begin going beyond talking as we've been, and to begin impacting on a broader policy framework, but also, as has been indicated by Farai and Mumba, how to begin assisting these communities who are feeling it worst on the ground. How can we start? Maybe I should give you a rest while you think about it, and I go back to David. David, can you help us?
Yeah,
I'll
look,
come back to you.
we work very closely with communities in South Africa, and we've got community monitors in all our mining communities that we train, and they report on a regular basis. They've got their own website, they've got community monitors network and so on. And we are kind of better informed than what the government is informed about the impact of mining at a community level as a result of the community monitoring system that we do have. I think if we can create, and we have tried to work with Zimbabwe and other countries to create a regional monitoring framework where communities actually take the lead in reporting and engaging and so on. But the problem also is the problem between ourselves and communities and even our community monitors, and the vast difference in our standards of living and our experiences and so on, where I don't think that they get sufficient voice. We tend to dominate their voice whenever there's an international discussion like this one today that we are having here. You know, the other thing is that in Malawi, Kayelekera, right up in the north near Karonga, we produced a report together there with the community which warned against a paladin mining, a uranium mining operation. And we identified Standard Bank as being the financier, and we discovered that they had no environmental impact assessment or management plan, and they didn't meet any of the legal requirements and so on. And we warned that it's in a high risk area for earthquakes and so on. And a year later, the area was hit by 12 earthquakes in December. And we attacked Standard Bank in South Africa. Standard Bank really is the Trojan horse in South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and so on. And Standard Bank is very, very arrogant as far as these issues are concerned. And I think that if we collectively attack the source of the finance to say, you know, and we did this with Switzerland, where we did a study on the human rights violations of coal mines in South Africa, and then we got them to run a referendum in Switzerland to prevent a company from investing in these companies that are abusing human rights. In Africa and Switzerland, you can do that. So if you could prove the case, then the government there holds a referendum, and if you win the referendum, then there can be a block. As far as communities are also concerned, I worked with the community of Cajamarca in Colombia, and there the community worked towards a referendum in the community against AngloGold Ashanti, and they actually stopped the mine because 95% of the people said no to the mine. And of course, the referendum went to the president, and the president said, oh, it's not valid. And so then the community contested the local elections and won them. Eventually, they won the provincial elections as well. And as we know, at the moment, there's a left-wing government in Colombia. You know, so the collective power of communities is what we need to try and mobilize. But once they are isolated, as they are in southeastern Zimbabwe and Manicaland and so on, and they don't have any global backing from civil society and so on, it's very easy to crush them because they are far away and there's no flow of information, constant flow of information out of them into the global domain and into the global narrative. And also we must be careful that the global narrative that we do put out there does not become part of a new Cold War narrative, but a narrative that says Africa before all else.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I mean, have you been in touch, your foundation, this amazing work that you've just made reference to? It's the first time I hear of it. Have you been able to coordinate with people like Farai and Kabemba and Mumba?
We have spoken, you know, with Farai and people in Zimbabwe and so on, and they seem to be quite competent as organizers, Farai and the environmental network people and so on in Zimbabwe, the people who we have engaged with there. I've been to mines in Shishobane and elsewhere to look at what is going on there, and so I know Zimbabwe well also from my past history. Yes, we have spoken, and we do speak at the alternative mining in Davos every year and so on. The problem for me is just that our organizations in South Africa, and it being associated with the Council of Churches, there's a semi-religious attitude towards it, and I don't think that that is going to take us very far. We shouldn't be praying and things like that. We should be doing. We should be getting off our knees and opening our eyes and doing things, rather than being on our knees and praying over these things. We all know the problems now. We've done 20 years of research on the problems. We've published 15 reports, and we decided we need to get communities to become active. And we need to get communities to engage with power. And we've run workshops in Zambia, in Solwezi, and so on, for communities there against First Quantum Mine, for example, and how the traditional authorities, even workshops for traditional authorities in Lusaka, on how they could actually activate their communities. But you see, the power of money as compared to the power of our voices is another story, because the mining company just flashes some money and the traditional authority falls over.
Yeah. No, thanks, David. Thank you very much. And also, it's good to see you again after so many years. And I hope that this forum would be the basis of the renewing our relationship, and together with people like Kabemba, who recommended you, we can do some work after this. Farai, what's your recommendation hereafter?
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, it was nice listening to David. I would say the starting point to me is consciousness. It is very important to have people who understand the global architecture of capitalism, its exploitative nature, its use of violence, destruction of the commons, the gendered impacts of extractivism, so that the communities understand the animal that they are dealing with, that it's not just a localized struggle, but it's part of a global structure that has got winners and losers. Once that consciousness has been established, where people understand the animal they are dealing with and foresee the end result, that they will only be left with open pits and scars on their bodies, they will be ready for action. David has already talked about the issue of action. I just want to amplify the voice of David to say, the problem we are having right now is that we are fighting little pitched battles, and yet we are dealing with a continental problem. If you listen, or rather observe the nationalists, what they did when they were fighting colonialism, they discovered that this is not a little problem that is fought at a local level, but it's a continental problem. That's why you had the frontline states, we had even those whose countries had liberated said, we are not free until the rest of Africa is free. So we need to reach out and have a regional action plan to take on extractivism head on and influence the powers that be, because it is very clear that our governments are captured. Our leaders are now leading the race to be billionaires. They are in the rent-seeking behavior where they are seeing these exploiters as their secret business partners. So unless there is a radical shift on the part of the populace, I don't see these leaders changing or transforming their approach towards extractivism, something which is benefiting them, their political parties, their families, and their cartels. Therefore, I want a cross-border approach where we start to speak to each other and ensure that we've got one movement that join us all. Thank you.
Thanks, Farai. Yeah, we'll, after this meeting, maybe next week, we should meet and begin discussing way forward. I've already alerted Claude about this. But again, as usual, Farai, thanks very much for your contribution. Let's move now to Chilekwa Mumba. Your recommendation on the way forward. I'm sure you support what has been said by David and Farai, but how can we concretely move forward? Farai has given the example of African nationalism. The difference, of course, now is that our African nationalists have become comprador class. They're the byproducts of this extractive industries that we're talking about. They are the people who have never produced except the commissions, the 10% that they've been getting. And we have leaders who are part of the comprador class now, running our countries. Mumba, Apongos.
Thank you once again, Professor. I think in terms of strategy, it's a very good idea that ourselves, civil society, has an aggressive approach with the objective of educating communities on their rights and duties. I think most of our communities, being indigent communities, they are not able to express themselves out of fear of the same authorities who are supposed to be looking after them. And I think it would be a great idea to have a drive within those communities, holding workshops and making them aware of their rights and duties, so that they do know that the power lies with them rather than the authorities, because all of these authorities depend on political power, which is derived from ordinary people. So if we are able to galvanize that power by, deliberately and aggressively having an approach where we definitely make them aware of their rights and duties on these issues, on these mining issues, I think it would be a good starting point.
Zikomo Mumba, thank you very much. It's really great to make your contact with you, and I hope we can continue working together, and especially on this subject. I think we're in familiar company here on this platform. We'll take it from here. Zikomo.
Thank you, Ms. Cole.
Charlize, can you put it together for us in terms of the way forward?
I agree with the previous speakers. I think that there's a complete and utter sense of hopelessness amongst communities. I've spent today sitting with 15 youth between the ages of 18 and 23 and talking to them about their aspirations for the future. They don't even have the ability to conceptualize potential because they feel so helpless. They feel like there is just no option for them. And revolution is not going to happen at the political level. Revolution happens because the grassroots movements, the communities rise up and topple the government. The government is not going to save us. But communities also need to be aware that no one is going to come to them to get them out of this hole. They need to start activating and building solidarity to move forward. And I think that the idea of going and doing political workshops with the communities, teaching communities about their rights is vitally important. The capacity building is about passing the candle on, the light on to the community so they can lift themselves up in this process. We need a multi-pronged approach. We need the communities to rise up and politicize themselves. But we also need international solidarity. And so, working in policy formats like the UN binding treaty on transnational corporations and human rights is important. We need to have this international solidarity and network of accountability mechanisms, and we need the communities to rise up and take the flame forward. NGOs need to be involved, schools need to be involved. I feel like all of society needs to activate itself. We're all sitting back and just watching the world burn in front of us and thinking we can't do anything about it. And mass revolutions have happened before. It's time for it to happen again.
Yes. So thanks, Charlize. Thanks very much for your contribution. The subject we've been tackling today is just a macrocosm of a bigger problem that has been the political economy of Africa for the last 150 years. And now, as I said earlier on, the history of mining, of the extractive industry in our country, in our countries, in Africa as a whole, but in Southern Africa in particular, has been largely that of the pathology of our economies, which are dependent on these extractive industries. It has also produced a class of leaders in both the private and public sectors, the comprador class, a very parasitic class, people who don't produce except through commissions and kickbacks. And this has been the history of our countries in Southern Africa, in particular Zimbabwe and Zambia, not to mention DRC and Angola. We are here also to pay homage to the three of you who have been working arduously in your communities. And we want to make you feel that in acknowledging that we also want to help you, to help ourselves, to help our communities, to help our countries, to fight the bigger battle. So we'd like to keep our contacts, to keep the lines open, and hereafter we'll be in touch with you and with Claude Kabemba to see how we can progress this discussion. Thank you very much. Again, I appeal to all our viewers, please support this program by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We are here in 2 weeks' time with a topic yet to be decided, but I want to thank our panel, Charlize, Amumba, Farai, and David. Thank you very much. Zikomo. Danke. Good night.